Andrew, I kid you not, every time there's been major news stories, I have often been on holiday, not in the office. Now, some people would say that's probably a good thing, but it's happening again because you are going to be speaking to a really interesting character here in Asia. I have to admit, I'm quite envious.
Super interesting guy. David Guerrero.
I mean, who is he? Because I think a lot of people haven't heard about David Guerrero, but he has this amazing career, as I understand it.
Unbelievable career, advertising luminary, somebody who was a real sort of, I guess, game changer in the advertising business in Southeast Asia. He's kind of got a foot in the East and the West in the sense that, you know, he grew up in a diplomatic family. His father was actually a Filipino diplomat. So as a kid, he grew up in the UK and then obviously went back to the Philippines.
So the book, you basically came to the team and you said, 1966, book, David Guerrero, Imelda Marcos' shoes, The Beatles. I mean, none of it made sense at the time, but then you had to go, you sort of had to explain the whole thing to us, you know, just put us in the picture a little bit.
You know, the story of the Beatles concerts that they did in the Philippines, in Manila in 1966. If you're a Beatles fan or a bit of a Beatles nerd, it's a very well-known story. But there are a few things which are really, really sort of seminal, if you like, about that story. First of all, they kind of snubbed Imelda Marcos and Ferdinand Marcos, who were brand new as that. Yeah, they were invited to a party at Malacanang Palace, which they didn't go to. The second thing, which is really interesting, is the fact that after those Manila concerts, when they left the Philippines, a whole load of things happened. Their security apparently was withdrawn. They were roughed up at the airport. And when they left, they made the decision that was it for the Beatles touring, that they wouldn't play live again. And basically about a year later, that's exactly what happened.
That is momentous. And to think that was as a result of a snub in the Philippines involving the Marcos family. Wow.
But there's two sides to every story, and that's what David deals with. And that's what I really can't wait to really dig into with him, because his book is all about the Filipino side to that story.
Well, let's get into it, shall we?
Yeah.
1966, Manila, 80,000 Filipinos, the biggest Beatles crowd ever. And then a palace snub, a media storm, and 4 men from Liverpool beaten out of the country they just electrified. The Beatles told their story.
Would you go to Manila again, George?
Oh, no, I didn't even want to go that time.
Me too.
Yeah, because we'd heard that it was a terrible place anyway. And when we got there, it was proved.
The world believed them. For 60 years, the Filipino side went untold. My very own TTA co-founder Andrew Clark sat down with David Guerrero, advertising legend, and the man who has finally written the other version. This is it.
David, a huge pleasure, a huge honor to have you here. This book, I read it over Christmas. I went to the book launch here in Singapore and it's absolutely amazing. I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm a bit of a Beatles nerd myself. So hearing that side of the story was absolutely fantastic. But I think what would be the best thing to do is for us to sort of jump in and learn a little bit about you. You're a bit of an advertising luminary in Asia, aren't you?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for that generous introduction. And yes, I have spent the large part of my career writing ads. And that has taken me from London to Hong Kong and for the most of my career in Manila, where I have established an ad agency in partnership with a multinational. And we have, over the last 28 years, established a pretty good reputation for doing work around the region and doing work in the Philippines.
But also promoting the Philippines to a global audience. You were behind some very famous Filipino tourism advertising campaigns, right?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to win the brief for Philippine tourism back in 2011. And the tourism secretary at that time was a former advertising guy himself. So he ran the account, as it were, of tourism really well. and proved to be the ideal client. And when we got together and we won that bid, the line occurred to me as I was on the beach in Boracay. Actually, I was going diving in Boracay, and it was just thinking how miserable it would be to go diving in sort of the North Sea in England, and how much more fun it actually is when you do it in the Philippines, because, you know, it's warm, it's beautiful, people are friendly, someone's helping you around. So I thought of this line actually underwater, and then I wanted to write it down. I couldn't. Sort of, by the time I got to the top, I was scribbling furiously, "It's more fun in the Philippines." And that turned into a global campaign that ran for 10 years or more for the country. So yeah, that's been our sort of calling card as an agency, and we're very proud of it.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
You are originally from the Philippines, but you grew up in the UK. And that's a very interesting story, because I think the context of your upbringing and obviously where you've ended up is really important to this story. So an interesting life growing up in the UK as the son of an ambassador of the Philippines to the UK. Is that correct?
It's a little bit more complicated than that. I mean, I'm absolutely mixed race Filipino English.
Yep.
I was born in England and not always participate in the whole diplomatic life thing. I was sent to boarding school. I was brought up some of the time by my mum, and only later did I spend time with both parents together. And actually, in a strange personal way, the Beatles played a huge part in that, because when my mum went out to India, where my father was posted, they sort of dumped me in the living room or something while they went off to do other things, and they left me with a copy of Sergeant Pepper.
Oh, really?
How
old were you?
I was 10 or
Yeah.
something at the time, and I think this might have been 1971. So the album had been out for a while, but this was the sort of, it's like my dad gave it to me. This is part of your education. Listen to this. Right? I hadn't listened to it, and I just sat there for the whole afternoon and played it over and over again. It's quite a significant piece of music for me, just in a personal sense. Yeah. So that's sort of always been there, and I didn't know what role the Beatles would play in my life, but that's how it kicked off.
And I think back then as well, the Beatles obviously a globally famous band, but also at the same time very big in the Philippines.
As you may know, the Philippines and the Filipinos are music lovers. It's a very musical country, and Beatles songs have been deeply permeated into the culture ever since the mid-60s.
Yeah, let's talk about the story. It was 48 hours that they spent in the Philippines.
Yep.
It was 1966, so that's 60 years
60
ago.
years this year.
This year.
Yep.
And in those 48 hours, an awful lot of things happened.
Yep.
Coming up, there's two sides to every story. I think that all in all, you have to be a little bit of a Beatles nerd to know the story.
Yes.
And effectively, it's a story of the Beatles in 1966. They're on a world tour. They finish in Japan. They turn up in the Philippines for a day of concert. And then they play their concerts.
Yep.
And a bit of weirdness happens at the concerts. And then the next day they leave and their security is withdrawn. And in the telling from the Beatles side, they are left with a very sort of bad feeling about the Philippines. They turn up at the airport, they're roughed up. Escalators are switched off.
Right.
They have a hard job getting to their airplane. And when they fly off, they say, we don't want to tour or play live anymore. And a year later, that's literally what happens. And a lot of, in that Beatles lexicon, a lot of people believe that it was the reason why the Beatles didn't tour again.
Yeah. I mean, just to put it in context, so 1966, they're absolutely at the height of their fame, and they're coming to the end of their sort of cheeky mop top, identical suits era. By the time they get to Manila, so this is 2 years into their sort of global fame, they've now played about 1,000 concerts in various cities in the world. So the novelty has worn off to some extent, right? But they're fully in the glare of the media spotlight as it was then, which is they have someone trailing them around who's taking photographs of them. But in each city, the local media is descending on them and wanting a piece of them, right? So when they get to the Philippines, which is, again, big spotlight, local press, they're a bit wary about this idea of, we didn't know they had a president. That's one of the quotes, and we didn't, what is this? There's a kind of, this is just another place and we don't want to give anything more than we want to give, right? So there's that. However, they did send an advance party ahead of time. One of their management team had gone ahead and made all kinds of agreements that they would, in fact, do various interviews and that they would turn up at various things. And with the tacit understanding that they would somehow find it in the itinerary to show up at the palace.
Yes.
Okay? So this is not formal, it's not agreed, but there's that sort of understanding, or there's like, we're going to make it happen, right? Yeah, don't worry. Now, the thing is, who's not included in that is Brian Epstein, who's their legendary manager, the fifth Beatle.
When they arrived in Manila, they got straight off the airplane and they were whisked off to the harbour where a boat was
via the Navy headquarters.
Oh, right? That's right, where they did a little press conference.
Yeah. So there was a press conference being held in the secure location, the Navy headquarters, the National Navy headquarters, and then walking from there to the yacht club, which is next door, and getting on this boat owned by sort of local big business groups, and they're on there, and everything's fine. I mean, that had all been arranged by their management, right? This is not the Filipinos doing this. This is the Beatles management saying, we want this boat and we're going to put them out there and it's going to be safe. The fans can't get to them. It's going to be all right. I think that one of the things is they only arranged for 4 sort of master cabins, right? Not rather than 5, right? Which is because Epstein is there and he would have wanted his own. So that's one reason I think he's pissed off and he doesn't like it. And then the other thing is that, yes, I mean, the boats, out in the bay, and the
idea was that they stay overnight there, and they weren't into that.
Well, they seemed to be okay with it, but Epstein wasn't, and he demanded that they got taken off the boat and brought to the Manila hotel, where rooms were arranged hastily, hurriedly, not being planned, but they somehow get them in there, and it's apparently 4 a.m. before they are settled down in their rooms. Okay, so this has been a long day. The absolute classic Hard Day's Night. They're there at 4 a.m. and expected the next day to go to the palace at around 10 or 11.
Yeah.
Right? So that, among other things, doesn't happen.
Yes. Okay. Coming up, separating fact from fiction. A catalogue of misunderstandings.
Absolutely.
A catalogue of things that appeared to be a promise, but not really in the end. Or
misplaced expectations.
Misplaced expectations. And obviously it culminates in this story that you talk about in your book. But the story that most people, if they look into it, here is a story that's told very much from the point of view of the Beatles and their management. But just like every story, there's 2 sides to it, isn't there?
Absolutely. It's a particular problem with the Beatles because they're very careful about their legacy and they control a lot of the material around their story. And even their own collaborators have been at times frozen out of the narrative because they take such care of it. So what tends to happen is they tell a story and then people repeat that story endlessly. So the same content gets repeated and repeated and repeated until it just becomes fact. Whereas really it hasn't been subjected to, sort of historical examination or evidence or just asking other people what went on. So,
that's something that you did.
I attempted to do that, indeed. So I did look at, because all of the stories are coming from their point of view. All the books that have been written are essentially the Beatles management or the Beatles themselves. So there's not been a book by Imelda about it. There's not been a book by the head of the airport about it. There's not been books by, in the Philippines, the whole thing's been sort of swept under the carpet to some extent because it was a bit of a mess and let's move on. But it's important because the people are still out there who do remember it and who can talk about it. And it's worth
tell me about some of those people.
Okay, well, there are a bunch of at that time schoolgirls who are listening to the music on jukeboxes. They've got a cappella groups in the playground. When they hear about the Beatles coming to the Philippines, they start taking odd jobs trying to save up money to get the tickets, which are quite expensive. There's all this excitement in the town, and all among people under 18, essentially, in the kind of just classic teenager. Now, the adults, the sort of political establishment was like, oh, this is quite interesting. The kids seem to love those people. Perhaps we should think about what can we do
Yes.
when they come here. This is the most famous group in the world. The most spotlight is on the entire world is looking at them every move. Maybe we should roll out the red carpet. Maybe how can we honor our guests? What can we do to make them, to show them Filipino hospitality? So somehow the idea is given or comes from Imelda to say, let's host them at the palace. Okay?
Yes.
Greater honor can there be than to host this famous pop group. We just received MBEs from the Queen.
Yep.
Why don't we bring them along to our palace and we'll just be nice to them and do this thing. And in the doing of it, the communications seem to break down, or at least the invitation is not properly conveyed or properly received or properly responded to. And on the Beatles side, there's published reports at the time saying, we got the invitations and nothing much was done about responding to them. And on the Filipino side is like, you told the promoters, right? You told them they come, right? Yeah. We yes. We telexed them, we sent them a telegram, and we didn't hear back no. So
yes, they didn't say no.
They didn't say no. So as far as we're concerned, it's a yes, right? And once they're here, what can they do? We're going to just drive them up there, So there's this kind of sense that it's going to happen. And she invests, a lot of her personal capital in this. I mean, she's got
to set up this party.
Yes, I mean, she invites 300 people to it.
And there's lots of children there as well.
Lots of children. It's a big treat.
And there's live TV cameras there. They're doing a live show waiting for the Beatles to arrive.
I mean, it couldn't be more high profile. And then, of course, they just don't show up. And there's this terrible sort of embarrassment where everyone's waiting around and they're saying, oh, maybe they're still on the boat, or maybe they went to the hotel, or you know what, they're not coming. And then at this point, Imelda just says, right, I've got better things to do. I'm not going to hang around waiting for these guys. And then the kids, so Amy, the eldest, and then Bong Bong. Now
Bong Bong was there. He was waiting
there.
for them too.
He was there, and they also essentially tear up their tickets.
And this happens on live TV as well, right? Because I'm not sure if I'm right in saying this, but George Harrison was interviewed and he said they were in the hotel room and they were watching this on television and they saw children crying because the Beatles didn't turn up.
They watched themselves not turning up.
Yes, they watched themselves not turning up. So what does that tell us about that sort of cultural difference, nuance, that really does show that there are two sides to this story?
I mean, I think in general, Asian cultures, Filipinos especially, or certainly no exception, are non-confrontational. So I think there's a lot of reliance on the personal connection there. So the local promoter. The local promoter knows the Beatles guy. Beatles guy seems to be okay with it. He's set up we've given him everything else he wanted. So I think this is, and then it's published in the newspaper. So it's not a secret. So when they land, the Sunday Times of Manila says, the Beatles will go and pay a call on the first family tomorrow, and the first family will go and attend the concert. And it's all very nice. It's a reciprocal thing. They will go to the palace. First family will all go to the concert. Front row seats. It's the most sought after seats in town. So that's all that's out there. Again, if it was now, you'd read it on the internet and you'd say, hang on a minute, we're not going. But of course, it's printed in the newspaper. They don't read it until they get there. And they just think it's a mistake. Oh, look, it says here we're going to the palace. We're not going to the palace, are we? I don't know. So there's all this, and the heightened expectations on the local front, basic unawareness of it on the Beatles side, at least the band themselves.
But let's talk about your girls from the fan club.
Yeah.
They actually end up getting to meet the Beatles, don't they? Yeah, in person, in the Manila hotel.
That's right. It's one of the happy consequences of so actually official displeasure, again, it's not a confrontation, but what happens is when they don't show up and they go and play the concert, and it's huge concerts. It's like 30,000 people the first concert, 50,000 people the second. So it's 80,000 in one day is the biggest paying audience they ever had, the Beatles ever had. So this is the happy...
Bigger than Shea Stadium.
Yeah, well, bigger in total, right?
Yes.
So this is the happy side of the show. This is the thing that even they, or the roadies, were proud of at that time. There's a big concert. They went well. It all kicked off.
And after the gig, they go back to the hotel.
So after the gig, I didn't realize it, but slowly these official displeasure starts to make itself felt. So they withdraw security again. Then, the room service stops working. Slowly things, and the next morning a tax bill will arrive, so any possible which way. And the hapless tour managers, Vic Lewis, gets hauled off to the police station and sort of interrogated all night. Why did you insult the First Lady? Why did you do this? So he's there, but no one really knows about that. Anyway, the fans turn up. They have persuaded their uncle to drive them to Manila Hotel after the concert. And at that time, there's a kid about their age running the elevator. There used to be elevator operators, right? So he's standing there and they say, hey, probably smile charmingly at him and say, hey, where are the Beatles staying? Oh, fourth floor. So he lets them in the elevator. They take it up to the fourth floor. And they're just sitting in the corridor, hoping to sort of get lucky,
hoping to be let in.
Hoping to get lucky. So they just sit there and they see Mal Evans and somebody walk past, and they're kind of like, what are you doing here?
This is Mal Evans, the roadie
with the local promoter. They see him walking past, and they just ignore them. Nothing happens, and then one door opens a crack, and it's John, right? And they go to silent scream, and of course they think they're being quiet, but they're not, because there are 6 girls about between the ages of 14 and 17, and they're all giggling and laughing, and so then Paul comes out and says, who are you? Da, 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 da. You can come in for a bit if you're good, but only 2 at a time. So they go in and they have this moment, I think, which they can still vividly recall now, and they can tell the whole story in great detail themselves. So they go in, they meet the band. I mean, this is very innocent, thing that they go and talk. They're a bit tongue tied. They keep asking, because they're all there except Ringo, so that every time the 2 go in, they'll say, "Where's Ringo?" So they have this adventure, which they treasured forever.
Just ahead, a dramatic departure from Manila. But let's talk about what kind of happens next. They've had their time in Manila. It's the day for them to leave, and there's nobody to help them get to the airport.
Well, they come downstairs. First bad sign is that all the newspapers have headlines like Beatles snub First Family, rude band stays away. It's just generally hostile, sensationalist.
Yes.
When they arrived, there had been 20 or so motorcycle escorts with their car, and then when they get down now, there's one guy.
There's one motorcycle escort. And then they get out to the airport, and it turns quite ugly at the airport. At least from the Beatles telling. The
Beatles telling the story, and even I think from Imelda's side, she says once that you can't help it if people feel so strongly about their first family. Yeah. So in both of their sides, they kind of wanted to play this up.
Yeah.
But when you talk to the fans, one of them is quite funny. She says she sees Ringo going towards the glass doors of the airport, and she sees the thugs coming towards him, and to protect him, she gets between them and him, and she pushes him through the door of the airport. Now I'm thinking, if I'm Ringo, I might think that it's the thugs pushing me through the door, but actually it was this 19-year-old
trying to
fan
get him out of the way
that was sort of protecting him. So there's that, and she says that inside there's no physical roughness with any of the band. There's one driver who seems to be the documented casualty who gets his leg kicked or something like that, but it's not a mass brawl that it is made out to be. It is just a sense of uncomfortableness, and then and they're being deliberately sort of not treated with respect.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put a link into the show notes of a few videos. One is when the Beatles get back to the UK. John Lennon is being interviewed, and he says, "We were kicked and pushed around by some monkeys."
We got kicked and pushed around by some monkeys, and we're very frightened.
Which sounds absolutely horrible and plays into awful sort of trope-like things. And then there's a couple of other interviews later on in the Beatles' career where George Harrison says that Marcos tried to kill them. Yeah. And Paul McCartney talking about the Philippines being a little bit of a corrupt regime. But the one sense that I get, and I think one of the themes in your book, is that very unfairly, a lot of those tropes, a lot of those opinions about the way that certainly the Beatles and the way the world saw the Philippines back then are still very much in place today. And I find that that's, certainly myself, the sense of justice I have, that's very unfair, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think there was very little knowledge about the Philippines at all at that time. So you could say anything and people might believe it. I think there's still stereotypes that exist. I think, again, it's important to understand how it is and also to see the truth of it. And see that the truth is that, at the time, again, at the time, the fans themselves, even the roadies and the fan club, they're all saying, look, there's only a few troublemakers in Manila. We know the bulk of the fans love us. It just became a better story in the end to just say, let's simplify it, and it was terrible.
Yeah.
And let's simplify it, and they were horrible. And then we're not going back there. But I think there's much more nuance to it than has ended up being told.
And you've told that story in this fantastic book, which obviously we thoroughly recommend people to read. We like to have a memento for every single episode that we have at Tank Talks Asia. So if you're okay with it, we'll take this book as our memento and we'll pop it up on the shelf.
Absolutely, yes, with pleasure, with pleasure.
So thank you very much for that. How has the book been doing? What is it called? Have you got a little plug for it?
Absolutely. Well, the book is You Won't See Me When the Beatles Ghosted Imelda. Well, here. And it's published by Penguin Southeast Asia and available now also on Kindle. And it's having a release date in the US and UK on May 12th.
David, thank you so much for coming on Tank Talks Asia.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Well, that's it for this episode. We really appreciate you listening all the way through. Don't forget to check out our show notes where you'll find relevant links to everything David and I have been talking about in case there's anything you'd like to follow up on. And there's a little video playlist in there that I've put of some interesting videos from the time and later on which relate to this story. And please do subscribe and follow Tank Talks Asia. That way, you'll never miss an episode. I'm Andrew Clark. From me and the team, thanks again for your time. Tank Talks Asia is an AsiaWorks production, and the views and opinions shared by our guests are their own.